pulled 41 people out of the Alaskan wilderness alive. I know what it feels like to find someone. I know the specific relief of a pulse under your fingers in the dark, the way your team exhales together without coordinating it. The strange, almost joy of carrying a hypothermic stranger toward a helicopter on a starless night. I also know what it feels like to be followed. Not by another person. I want to be precise about that because imprecision is how you lose people's trust. And trust is the only currency I have left after 18 years of doing this work. The dogs felt it first. They always do. A 100-pound Malamute that has tracked human scent through whiteout conditions will simply stop. Plant all 4 feet. Refuse. No command reaches them. They just stare into the tree line and shake. 5 times that happened to my teams. 5 different locations, 5 different years, the same refusal, the same direction. I am going to tell you about all 5. Not because I have resolved any of them, because I kept the coordinates, and the coordinates form a shape. And I have been sitting alone with that shape for long enough that I need someone else to see it. My name is not important. My title is Search and Rescue Coordinator for a district that covers roughly 14,000 square miles of Alaskan interior. And I have held that title for 18 years. Before that, I spent 4 years as a field deputy and 2 years as a volunteer before anyone was paying me to do it. So when I tell you I have seen most of what this work produces, I am not speaking loosely. I want to be clear about the kind of person I was going into these 5 missions because it matters to what happened after. I am not a superstitious man. I was raised practical in a practical place by people who understood that the wilderness does not traffic in mystery. It traffics in cold, in distance, in the specific cruelty of terrain that looks navigable until it isn't. Most people who go missing in Alaska are not taken by anything. They are taken by their own decisions, compounded by weather, compounded by time. My job for 18 years has been to reverse that compounding before it becomes irreversible. That requires clarity. It requires a person who finds the rational explanation first, because in this work, the rational explanation is almost always correct, and the time you waste entertaining anything else is time a living person spends getting colder. I was good at that. I was, genuinely, one of the better skeptics I knew. My second in command, a woman named Carla who has been running field operations with me for 11 years, used to say it like this. You know what Marcus's superpower is? He doesn't need the story to be interesting. He just needs it to be true. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. The story doesn't need to be interesting. It needs to be true. Find the true thing, follow the true thing, bring the person home. That was the entire job. I still believe that. I want you to understand that I have not abandoned that framework. I have simply encountered 5 times across 18 years of honest work, something that the framework cannot hold. I don't know what to do with that, except tell you exactly what happened. The first time it happened, I almost missed it entirely. That is the thing about the first time. You are not looking for a pattern yet. You are just doing the work. Late September, 4 years into the job, a hiker had gone out on a trail south of the Alaska Range and not come back. His car was in the trailhead lot, 3 days old by the time we got the call. His name was Daniel. He was 34. Experienced enough to carry the right gear, inexperienced enough to have gone out alone without filing a proper route plan with anyone who would have noticed sooner. We put 3 teams in. My team, a team led by a deputy named Rowan, and a dog team handled by a woman called Jana, who had been working search dogs in Alaska for longer than I had been doing any of this. Jana's dog was a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois named Pepper. I want you to hold that name because she is the one who matters in this story. Not the hiker, not me, not any of the deputies. Pepper is the one who saw it first. Day 1 was unremarkable. We gridded the southern approach, found trail sign but no Daniel, made camp at the ridgeline, and started again before sunrise. Pepper was working beautifully. Jana told me that evening that she was as focused as she had ever seen her, pulling hard on scent, working her grid with the kind of consistency that takes years to build in an animal. Day 2, mid-morning, the grid brought Pepper's team to a section of the tree line on the eastern edge of our search area. Dense spruce, the ground soft from 2 days of light rain, good tracking conditions. Jana told me later that Pepper hit the edge of that section and simply stopped. Not a cautious stop, and not a distracted stop. All 4 feet planted, weight back, the kind of posture that Jana described as the dog removing herself from a situation she had decided was not negotiable. Jana worked her through the standard restart sequence. Pepper would not move forward. So Jana pulled her back, looped around the section by roughly 30 meters, and they continued the grid from the other side. She noted it in her field log and moved on because we had a missing person and one unusual dog behavior does not stop a search. They came back through the same area on the afternoon pass. Pepper stopped at the identical point. Same posture, same refusal. Jana gave her every command she had. The dog gave her nothing back except that fixed, backward wait, and her eyes locked on a point inside the tree line that none of us could identify. The third pass was the following morning. Pepper stopped before Jana had even brought her fully into the approach. She had recognized the area before they reached it and had already made her decision. We found Daniel that afternoon, 2 kilometers north, dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive and coherent. Good outcome. Clean extraction. We had him at the helicopter inside 90 minutes, and I considered the mission closed in every way that counted. The walk back out took us along the eastern tree line. I was moving with 2 deputies, a man named Cruz and a woman named Tate. Both experienced, both people I trusted completely. We were not talking much. You get quiet after a successful extraction, something releases and the body starts accounting for what it has spent. And we were maybe 20 minutes into the return when Cruz slowed down without explanation. I came up beside him. "Something in the trees," he said. Not alarmed. Observational. The way you'd note weather. I looked. I saw spruce. Shadow between spruce. The ordinary architecture of an Alaskan tree line in the last light of a September afternoon. I told him it was probably a moose and kept walking. He followed. We didn't discuss it again. It was not until the debrief the following morning that Tate mentioned, entirely unprompted, that she had felt something pacing the team on the eastern return. Keeping distance, staying just outside the point where you could resolve it into a shape. She said it had lasted about 10 minutes and then stopped, as if something had reached a boundary it was not going to cross. Cruz looked at her for a moment and then looked at me. I found Jana after the debrief. I asked her about Pepper. Has she ever refused a grid section like that before? Jana took a moment before she answered. No. Any idea what caused it? She looked at me the way experienced people look at you when they have a thought they have decided not to offer. I pulled her GPS track log when we got back. She circled around that section all 3 times, added distance each time to stay clear of it. 60 meters of avoidance, minimum. That's not a dog reacting to a smell or a sound. That's a dog making a deliberate decision. I wrote in my report that Pepper had experienced an uncharacteristic behavioral anomaly in the eastern grid section, cause undetermined. I noted the coordinates. I kept the coordinates. I did not know yet why that instinct mattered. Within 2 years, I would know exactly why. The second mission was 18 months later. January. The kind of January that Alaska produces when it wants to remind you that your presence here is provisional and always has been. A snowmobiler had gone out on a trail system northwest of the district and not returned by nightfall. His wife had called it in at 7 in the evening. By 8, we had a team staged at the trailhead and 2 deputies, a man named Foss and a woman named Del Rey, running overnight watch at the staging area while the rest of us rotated through rest shifts in the vehicles. Standard protocol for a winter overnight. You do not put exhausted people into the dark at -20. You sleep in shifts and you keep 2 people awake and radioing at all times so that if something changes in the field, you have a response ready. Foss and Del Rey were my steadiest people. I want to emphasize that because it matters. Foss had been with me for 6 years. Del Rey for 4. Neither of them was prone to drama. Neither of them was the kind of deputy who embellished a situation to make it more interesting. If anything, both of them had the opposite tendency. They underreported. They smoothed things down. It was something I had occasionally had to correct in their written accounts because the clinical flatness of their language sometimes failed to convey the actual severity of a situation to people reading the reports later. I'm telling you this so you understand what it meant when their radio went quiet. I came on at 6 in the morning for the early shift handover. The vehicles were where I had left them. The equipment was staged correctly. The camp was in order in every visible way. What was not in order was Foss and Del Rey, who I found sitting outside the lead vehicle on the equipment cases we used as field seating without their outer layers, in conditions that were sitting at -22 by my thermometer. They were not moving. They were not talking to each other. They were both facing northwest, toward the tree line at the far edge of the staging area, with the specific stillness of people who are not cold, because they have gone somewhere inside themselves where the cold cannot reach them. I said Foss's name. It took 3 repetitions before he turned. His eyes were present. That was the first thing I checked, and I am grateful they were. He knew who I was. He knew where he was. He gave me his name and the date without being asked. Cognitively, he was there. But there was something sitting behind his eyes that I did not have language for then, and still do not have precise language for now. The closest I can get is this. He looked like a man who has just set down something enormously heavy and is not yet sure whether his hands remember how to work without the weight. I got both of them into the vehicle and got heat on them. Then I pulled the radio log. Normal check-ins through midnight. 1:10, 1:30, 1:50. All routine, all brief, all in Del Rey's voice because she had the cleaner radio manner of the 2. Then the 2 o'clock check-in, also routine, also unremarkable. Then nothing. A 4-hour gap in the log where there should have been check-ins at 2:30, 3, 3:30, 4, 4:30, and 5. 6 missed check-ins across 4 hours. And I had not been woken by the alert system because the alert threshold was set for gaps of more than 2 hours, and something had gone wrong with that setting that I have never been able to fully account for either. I radioed the field medic, a man named Briggs, who was running with the primary search team. I asked him to come to staging when he had a moment. When he arrived, I had Foss and Del Rey sit with him separately, and I watched the examinations from outside the vehicle. Briggs came out after about 20 minutes. He stood beside me in the cold, and he took slightly longer than usual to say what he was going to say. They're both fine, physically. Core temps are recovered, no frostbite, no neurological flags. But, I said, because there was clearly a but. Both of them have marks on their wrists. Both wrists, both of them, same location. A small. Consistent with cold exposure in terms of the tissue presentation. But the geometry is wrong for cold exposure. Cold damage is irregular. These are arranged. I asked him what he meant by arranged. I mean, they form a pattern, consistent between both individuals. Same pattern, same location, same depth. Cold doesn't do that. Cold is not precise. He filed it as cold exposure with an unusual presentation. I asked him to. I told him I would note it in my own report and review it with the district medical officer. I did not do that. I am telling you now that I made a deliberate choice to let an insufficient explanation stand because the alternative explanation had no floor, and I had a missing person to find and a team that needed to function, and I was not prepared to open a door I could not see the bottom of. We found the snowmobiler at first light. He was alive, barely. Found by Rowan's team at the base of a gully 3 kilometers from the trail system. He had been there for most of the night, and it is genuinely remarkable that he survived. I have thought more than once about whether his survival and whatever happened to Foss and Delray in those 4 hours occupy the same moment in some way I cannot map. I do not know. I have nowhere to put that thought, so I mostly try not to take it out. Before the debrief, I sat with Delray alone in the vehicle for a few minutes. I asked her simply and directly what she remembered. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she said, 2 o'clock check-in. I remember making it. I remember putting the radio down. I remember looking out at the tree line because there was something at the edge of it that I thought was worth watching. What kind of something? I asked. She shook her head. Not an evasion. Genuinely not having the word. And then you were saying my name. And it was 6 in the morning, and I was cold in a way I don't have an explanation for, because I know I was wearing my outer layer at 2 o'clock. I know I was. She paused. Then she said the sentence I have never been able to set down. Marcus, I don't think those 4 hours went anywhere. I think they're still happening somewhere. I think if you went back to that tree line right now and stood in the right place, you'd walk right into them. I have been back to that tree line. Not immediately. 3 months later, in spring, when the snow was soft enough to read. I will not tell you what I found there because what I found there belongs to Mission 5, and I was not ready to understand it yet. But I went back. And the right place, it turned out, was not hard to find. The third mission was the one that made me stop using the word coincidence. I had been using it carefully up to that point. Pepper's refusal at the eastern tree line was a coincidence with no second data point to make it a pattern. The 4 hours that Foss and Delray lost was a coincidence with no geographic connection to the first event that I could demonstrate on a map. I am trained to resist pattern recognition that outruns evidence. In search work, the person who sees patterns that aren't there sends teams in the wrong direction and people die. So I held the word coincidence like a tool I was not ready to put down, and I kept working. The third mission was a summer search. A family of 3, 2 parents, and a teenage daughter had gone into the interior on a hiking trip and missed their extraction window by 36 hours. No distress signal, no radio contact, the kind of silence that usually means disorientation rather than injury. We put a helicopter up within the hour. It was a good search, genuinely clean. We found them in the first 4 hours, healthy, embarrassed. The daughter sunburned across her nose in the specific way of someone who has been having a better time than her parents. We got all 3 of them into the aircraft and headed back toward the district staging area with the kind of mood that a clean extraction produces. Loose, relieved. The particular lightness of a job that did not cost anyone anything. The pilot's name was Garrett. Former Army aviation, 2,000 plus hours over Alaskan terrain, the kind of pilot who narrates instrument readings under his breath as a habit so ingrained he probably does it in his sleep. And I had flown with Garrett on 11 missions. I'd never seen him uncertain in an aircraft. We were 20 minutes into the return flight when he went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a pilot managing a routine leg, a different quality of quiet. I was in the co-pilot seat and I watched him scan his panel in a way that had a question in it, which was not how Garrett usually scanned anything. Then every instrument on that panel did something wrong. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and I have enough respect for you to not reach for dramatic language when plain language will do the same work. What I saw was this. The altimeter read an altitude that was not our altitude. The compass heading disagreed with our actual heading by a margin that would have put us over water. The fuel gauge dropped to a reading that, if accurate, meant we had been burning at a rate that was physically impossible for that aircraft under those conditions. The GPS screen held our position for approximately 3 seconds and then moved us 400 meters to the west and held us there. Garrett did not panic. I want to be clear about that. He went to manual. He held the aircraft steady. He talked through what he was seeing in the same under-the-breath instrument narration he always used, just slower. The family in the back did not understand what they were looking at. I did. I watched Garrett fly by feel and horizon reference for 90 seconds over a ridgeline that I did not, in that moment, recognize. Then everything corrected. Every instrument returned to its accurate reading simultaneously. The GPS put us back where we actually were. Garrett let out a breath that he had been holding for the entire 90 seconds, and I realized I had been holding mine too. We landed without further incident. While the family was being checked over, I walked around to where Garrett was doing his post-flight check, and I stood with him for a moment. "What was that?" I said. He kept his eyes on the aircraft. He ran his hand along the tail section the way pilots do when they are checking with their hands what their eyes have already told them. "I don't know. I've had instrument failures, individual failures, sensor glitches, software anomalies. I've never had everything go at once and come back at once." "The aircraft checks out?" I asked. "Perfectly." Then he looked at me. "We didn't drift, Marcus. I had the aircraft. We were where I put us the whole time. I pulled the GPS track log that evening. The log showed the aircraft drifting 400 meters laterally during those 90 seconds. A clean, consistent drift, not the erratic movement of turbulence or control input variation. A smooth translation, as if something had simply moved us and then moved us back. Garrett did not drift that aircraft. I was sitting beside him. He held it precisely. The log recorded something that did not happen to the aircraft I was in. I cross-referenced the coordinates of that ridgeline against my field notes from Mission 1. Different location on the map. The same ridge system. The same orientation. Pepper's 60-meter avoidance and Garrett's 90 seconds of impossible instrument readings sat on the same spine of land, separated by season and altitude, and 18 months of my best efforts to call them unrelated. I stopped using the word coincidence that evening. I did not yet have a replacement word. I am still not sure I do. I need to tell you about Mission 4 carefully, not because I am protecting anyone. The man we were searching for has been dead for 2 years now, and his family has given me something close to permission by never asking me not to talk about it. I need to tell it carefully because it is the mission where I stopped being a witness to something happening to other people and became a data point myself. And I am aware of what that does to credibility. I am asking you to hold that awareness alongside everything else I am about to tell you. Late October, an elderly man named Warren, 79 years old, moderate to advanced dementia, had walked away from his daughter's property on the eastern edge of the district sometime between 9 in the evening and midnight. His daughter had checked on him at 9. At midnight, he was not in his room, and the exterior door was unlocked. She called it in immediately, which was the right decision, because a man of Warren's age and condition in late October in Alaska is not a search that benefits from waiting until morning. We had 12 people across 3 grids by 2 in the morning. I ran command from the staging area and rotated between grids through the night. Grid A covered the road system and the open ground to the north. Grid B worked the creek drainage to the west. Grid C took the forest to the southeast, dense spruce and birch, difficult going, the kind of terrain that grabs at your gear and disorients your direction sense within the first 20 minutes. The first night produced nothing except cold and fatigue. We rested in shifts and went back in at first light and continued through the day. No sign, no trail, no response to calls. The dog teams were picking up trace scent in Grid B, but it was dispersed and old and leading nowhere conclusive. By the second evening, I was beginning to prepare for an outcome I did not want to prepare for. Because a man of Warren's condition, who had been outside for approaching 40 hours in those temperatures, was running out of the kind of luck that keeps people alive. At 11:47 on the second night, my radio picked up a transmission from Grid C. It was one of my deputies, a woman named Sable, and her voice had something in it that I want to describe precisely. It was not fear. It was the specific quality of a trained person reporting something their training has not given them language for. She said there were lights in the forest. Moving. A loose grouping, she said. Low to the ground, maybe 1.5 meters at most, moving in a pattern that was not random. She had already checked against the positions of the other teams. Nobody from grids A or B was anywhere near her location. She had 3 other team members with her, and all 4 of them were looking at the same thing. I asked her to hold position, and I went to Grid C myself. It took me 14 minutes to reach Sable's position. I want to account for those 14 minutes, because in that time, I ran through every explanation I had. Bioluminescence is rare in Alaskan forest environments, but not impossible. Reflected light from the team's own equipment can produce unexpected effects in dense tree cover. People in the second night of a high-stress search begin to work at the edge of their perceptual reliability. I had all of those explanations fully assembled and ready to deploy by the time I pushed through the last line of spruce and came up beside Sable. She pointed southeast without saying anything. I saw them. I am going to describe what I saw, and I'm going to stay with the description for as long as I can before I tell you what I could not help thinking. Because the description is what I actually have, and the interpretation is only what my mind produced under pressure. And I want to keep those 2 things separate for as long as possible. There were 5 of them. Lights, for want of a better word. Though light implies a source, and then what I was looking at did not resolve into a source when I looked directly at it. They were pale, not white exactly. Not that the closest color reference I have is the quality of sky on a heavily overcast day just before snow. That specific diffuse gray-white that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They were low, as Sable had said, roughly 1 meter to 1.5 meters off the ground. They were moving in a configuration that maintained its shape, the way a formation maintains its shape, with the individual elements adjusting relative to each other as they moved rather than drifting independently. They were moving toward the northern edge of Grid C. I watched them for what my field log tells me was 4 minutes, though I would have told you 30 seconds if you had asked me in the moment. I held the description in my head, and I kept reaching for the explanation I had assembled on the way through the trees. And at some point in those 4 minutes, I accepted that the explanation did not fit what I was seeing, and I stopped trying to make it fit. That is the most honest account I can give you of what happened in my mind. The discipline failed. Not because I am not disciplined, because what stood in front of me was not something my discipline had been built to process. Then they were gone, not gradually. Present and then not present, the way a sound stops rather than the way a light fades. Nobody in Grid C spoke for what felt like a long time. We found Warren the following morning at the northern edge of Grid C, seated at the base of a spruce tree with his hands folded in his lap, alive. Warm to the touch in a way that made no physiological sense given the temperature and his clothing, and lucid in a way that his diagnosis said he had no business being. He knew his daughter's name. He knew his own name. He looked at me when I crouched in front of him, and he said, clearly and without confusion, that he was ready to go home now. He was 22 miles from his daughter's property. I have walked that terrain in full gear on a good day. It takes the better part of 2 days. Warren was 79 years old with moderate to advanced dementia, and he had been outside for 40 hours, and he was warm and lucid, and his boots showed no wear consistent with 22 miles of forest travel. I do not have an explanation for Warren. I want to say that plainly. I have no explanation for his temperature, his lucidity, the condition of his boots, or the distance between where he was last seen and where we found him. I have considered every possibility I know how to consider, and none of them hold the weight of all 4 of those facts simultaneously. Warren lived for 3 more years after that October. His daughter called me once, about a year before he died, not to tell me anything specific, just to say that he had become, in those final years, afraid of the dark for the first time in his life. That a man who had spent 79 years in Alaska, who had worked outside in every condition this state produces, had started leaving every light in the house on at night and could not or would not explain why. She did not ask me if I knew what had happened to him out there. I think she had decided she did not want the answer. I respected that. I still do. I am the physical evidence for Mission 4. I have no instrument log, no track anomaly, no geometric marks on anyone's wrist. I have myself, standing in the dark in Grid C for 4 minutes, watching something I cannot explain move through the trees toward the place where a missing man was waiting to be found. Make of that what you will. I have been making of it what I can for several years now, and I am not finished yet. The 5th mission should not have made the list. By every metric I used to evaluate a search, it was a success. Single missing person. A trail runner named Corinne, who had rolled her ankle on a backcountry loop and sheltered under a rock overhang when she understood she could not walk out. We had her position triangulated within 3 hours of the call, reached her in 5, had her at the trailhead in 6. Clean. Complete. The kind of mission you use in training examples because nothing went wrong. I drove home that evening and made dinner and sat with my wife and felt the specific, uncomplicated satisfaction of a day that had done what a day was supposed to do. 3 days later, I woke at 5 in the morning and stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and looked out at the tree line at the back of my property and understood that something was wrong with it. I want to be precise about what I mean, because precision is the only tool I have left when the event itself resists explanation. Nothing was there. I am not telling you I saw a figure or a shape or a light. What I am telling you is that the tree line at the back of my property, which I have looked at through that window for 11 years, did not look the way it looks. It looked the way a room looks when someone has just left it. That particular quality of recent vacancy, the air still organized around a presence that is no longer there. I have no more precise language than that. I looked at my tree line, and it felt occupied in the way that an empty room feels occupied when you know someone was just in it. I finished my coffee and told myself it was 5 in the morning and I was not fully awake. It happened again the following morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th morning, my dog woke me before my alarm. His name is Burl, a 7-year-old mixed breed with no particular working lineage, not a trained search animal, not a dog with any professional history of reading environments for a living. He is a family dog who sleeps at the foot of our bed and asks for nothing more demanding than his dinner at a consistent hour. Burl was standing at the bedroom door facing the back of the house with all 4 feet planted and his weight back. I had seen that posture once before. On a dog named Pepper, I'm at the eastern edge of a search grid 4 years earlier. The same planted weight. the same refusal that no command could reach. Pepper had made a decision, and Burl, who had never worked a search in his life, had arrived at the same one. I got up and walked Burl to the back door. He would not go through it. I opened it, and he stood at the threshold and looked out toward the tree line and did not move. I stood beside him for several minutes in the early morning cold and looked at what he was looking at and felt, with a clarity I was not comfortable with, that whatever he was refusing to show itself to me specifically, that it knew the difference, that it had assessed me and made a decision about what I was permitted to see. I did not tell my wife. I want to sit with that for a moment because it is the detail I am least proud of in this entire account. 18 years of a marriage built on honesty. A woman who has watched me come home from the worst outcomes this work produces and has never once asked me to be less than truthful with her about what I carry. I did not tell her. I told myself I was protecting her from something I had not yet understood well enough to explain. The more accurate version is that saying it out loud to someone who knew me that well would have made it real in a way I was not ready for. 2 weeks after Mission 5, I drove back out to the trailhead where we had staged the search. Early morning, before anyone else was around. I told my wife I had paperwork to check on site. I parked where we had parked the command vehicle, and I walked into the forest alone, without a team, without a radio beyond my personal unit, which I am aware was a decision that violated every protocol I have ever written. I walked for 40 minutes along the route Corinne had been running when she went down. The forest was quiet in the way that Alaskan forest is quiet in the early morning, which is a specific and layered quiet that takes years to learn to read correctly. I was reading it correctly. Nothing was behaviorally wrong with the environment. Birds where birds should be. Wind moving through the upper canopy in the pattern that wind moves through that particular tree cover at that time of year. Ordinary in every audible and visible way. And then I walked into a section of the trail where the air changed. Not temperature. The temperature was consistent. What changed was the quality of the silence, which I know sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they are reaching past what language can actually hold. But I am reaching because that is what I have. The silence in that section of the trail was not the silence of an empty place. It was the silence of a place that had stopped making sound because I had arrived. The distinction sounds subtle. It did not feel subtle. It felt like walking into a conversation that had been continuing for a very long time and stopping every voice in the room simultaneously. I stood there for what my watch later told me was 2 hours. I have no account of those 2 hours. I am not telling you I lost them the way Foss and Del Rey lost theirs. I did not experience a gap. I experienced the 2 hours passing in the way that time passes when you are in a state of attention so complete that the ordinary mechanisms of duration stop functioning. I was present for every moment of it. I simply cannot tell you what I was present to. The memory of those 2 hours exists as a shape without content, a space where something was, and what was there will not resolve into language no matter how directly I approach it. I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. Then I drove to the district station, and I found the office of the oldest ranger I know, a man named Joseph Athabaskan, who has been working this land for longer than I have been alive, and who has a quality of stillness in conversation that I have always trusted and never entirely understood. And I sat across from him, and I told him everything. Mission 1 through Mission 5. Pepper and the coordinates, and Foss and Del Rey, and the marks on their wrists, and Garrett and the GPS track log, and the lights in Grid C, and Warren's boots, and the tree line at the back of my property, and Burl at the door, and the 2 hours in the forest that I cannot account for. I talked for a long time. Joseph did not interrupt once. He sat with his hands flat on his desk, and he watched me the way he watches everything. with the specific attention of a person who has learned that most of what matters is said in the spaces between words. When I finished, he was quiet for long enough that I began to wonder if he was going to say anything at all. Then he said, "You've been going to the same place. You know that." I told him the coordinates were different on every mission. He shook his head, slowly, the way you shake your head at someone who is using the wrong units of measurement. Not on a map. The same place. It found your teams, and it followed your teams, and then it followed you because you were the one paying attention. The ones that pay attention are the ones it comes back to. It's been here longer than the maps. The maps don't describe it. They just describe the land around it. I asked him what it wanted. Joseph looked at me for a moment, with an expression I have turned over many times since, and still cannot fully read. I don't think "want" is the right word. I think it's the wrong question, and I think you already know that, or you wouldn't have kept the coordinates. He did not say anything else on the subject. I did not ask him to. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen window and I looked at my tree line, and it looked exactly as it always looks. Ordinary. Familiar. Mine. Burl came and sat beside me and did not look at the door. I have thought about what Joseph said every morning since. I have not decided whether it is comforting. I have decided it is true. I run searches differently now. Nothing in the official manual has changed. The protocols on paper are identical to what they were before Mission 1. What has changed is the layer underneath the protocols. The things I do that I would describe to an auditor as instinct and would describe to you right now as something more deliberate than that. I note which direction the dogs look when they refuse. I log it separately in a personal record that lives in my desk drawer and not in the district system. I cross-reference coordinates across missions not just by map position, but by ridge system, by watershed, by the orientation of the land underneath the labeled geography. I pay attention to which team members go quiet on the walk back out, and I check in with them privately at debrief, not with a form, just a conversation, or just enough to know if they are carrying something they have not found language for yet. When I bring new people onto the team, I tell them one thing that is not in any training document. I tell them that in this work, you will occasionally enter an environment that knows you are there before you announce yourself. I frame it as situational awareness. I frame it as reading terrain. What I am actually telling them is to pay attention to the quality of the silence and to trust what they feel before they trust what they can explain. Because in 18 years, the feeling has been wrong far less often than the explanation. I still believe the rational explanation is almost always correct. I hold that. I need to hold that to do this work at all. Almost always is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and I know it. Here is what I have not resolved and what I do not expect to resolve. On the morning, I drove out to Mission 5's coordinates alone. Before I walked into that section of trail and stood there for 2 hours I cannot account for, I checked my personal log. The coordinates of that trail system sat on the same ridge as every other location in this account. The same bearing, the same spine of land, running northeast to southwest across this district and beyond it, appearing in 5 missions across 12 years under 5 different labeled locations on 5 different maps. I do not know what is on that ridge. I do not know what it wants with search teams, or with the people we are sent to find, or with me specifically in the years since I started paying attention. What I know is that it has been there longer than the maps. And the maps, as Joseph said, do not describe it. His words, not mine. But I have stopped being able to tell the difference. If you have worked in wilderness search and rescue, and something in this account felt familiar, I would like to hear from you. Not because I have answers, because I have coordinates, and I am no longer certain I should be the only one keeping them. If this is the first time you have found this channel, there are 4 more accounts here that follow the same thread. I did not plan for them to connect. They connected anyway. Come back. I have more to tell you.